One thing I've learned from this series is that just like people, Hollywood meltdowns come in all different shapes and sizes. On the one hand, there's the spectacular implosions of Joss Whedon and Brie Larson, who reached the height of fame and success only to fall from grace in dramatic fashion. On the other hand, there's the Rachel Zeglers of the world, whose egos far outshine their talents and accomplishments, killing their careers before they even get off the ground. But there's another kind of crash and burn, dear viewer, a kind of slow motion train wreck where you can see the pieces falling off even as it keeps ploughing forwards until finally the whole thing derails and comes crashing to a halt. Which brings me neatly along to the story of Dwayne Douglas Johnson, better known as The Rock. A man who once dominated the box office with the same intensity as he ruled the wrestling ring, possibly the biggest and most marketable celebrity on the planet who seemed to be everywhere, doing everything and beloved by everyone. A man whose constantly upbeat, larger-than-life persona masked a hidden world of greed, ego, lies and hubris. A man so addicted to success and fame that it ended up consuming him. A man for whom the world itself was simply not enough. So join me for another episode of Crash and Burn as I tell you the Dwayne Johnson story. Dwayne Douglas Johnson was born in California in 1972, the son of wrestling legend Rocky Johnson. And he wasn't the only wrestler in the family. His uncle, his adopted grandfather, and even his grandmother were all in the business, and it seemed like Dwayne was destined to follow them. He had different ideas though, and got into pro football instead. I mean, the guy was an absolute fucking unit, 6'5" and 250 pounds at like 18 years old, so who can blame him? He was a good athlete for sure, but he never quite reached the big time in football and finally got cut loose after 4 years in the sport. With no high school qualifications and not many other options, he turned instead to wrestling, used his family connections to fast track his way into the business, and made his debut in the WWE the following year, wrestling under the name Rocky Maivia. And on paper at least it seemed like a great idea. His dad had been a fan favourite, he was young and athletic, and he was wrestling as a babyface, the kind of guy you're normally supposed to cheer for. Instead it turned into a fucking disaster. The fans could smell a manufactured star a mile away, they hated his generic good guy persona, and the harder the WWE tried to push him, the more they rebelled against him. And when Dwayne was sidelined with a knee injury, it seemed like his wrestling career was over. Instead, he came back a few months later with a completely different personality, playing a cocky, arrogant heel, calling himself The Rock. He shit-talked everyone around him, constantly referred to himself in the third person, and generally acted like he didn't give a shit anymore. It was an inspired decision and an instant hit, tapping into the Attitude Era that was just kicking off at the time, and in the space of a few months he went from one of the most hated wrestlers in the business to one of its most iconic superstars. He seemed to have a keen sense of what people wanted from him and the ability to reshape his persona to suit it. Keep that in mind, dear viewer, because it'll be important later. Things were going great in the WWE, but Dwayne's aspirations extended way beyond the wrestling ring. Just like Hulk Hogan before him, he wanted to get into the movie business, and after playing the bad guy in 2001's The Mummy Returns, he landed his first lead role in the spin-off The Scorpion King. Dwayne turned out to be a natural on the big screen, and the movie would go on to make $180 million worldwide. Not bad for a first-time actor. Unfortunately, this success wouldn't last. The next few years saw his career seesaw all over the place, doing everything from action to comedy, sports biopics to thrillers, and even Disney movies. None of it was really working though. Most of his projects either flopped or barely broke even. Just like his early wrestling career, he couldn't quite find the persona that worked for him. Was he supposed to be a tough, no-nonsense hard man, a family-friendly comedy actor, a commercial action star, a villain, a hero? Well, the answer finally came in 2011 when he joined the Fast and the Furious franchise, which itself was going through a bit of a redemption arc after struggling for years to figure out what it was supposed to be. His character Luke Hobbs was an instant hit with fans, tapping into the same charismatic anti-hero persona that had made The Rock so popular in wrestling a decade earlier. From then on, the Dwayne Johnson hype train was finally running at full speed, and a wave of big-budget, highly successful action movies followed. For years, Hollywood producers had been looking for the next Arnold Schwarzenegger, the next definitive action star who would shape a whole generation of movies, and in Dwayne Johnson, it seemed they'd finally found what they were looking for. He was big and muscly, he was charismatic, he was marketable, he could navigate interviews and film junkets like a seasoned pro, he was cool enough to appeal to adults, but clean-cut cut and inoffensive enough to appeal to kids and families. He was somehow able to be everything to everyone and make it look easy. If Disney somehow made movie stars instead of movies, Dwayne Johnson is pretty much what they would churn out, and pretty soon the fucking guy was literally everywhere. Movies, commercials, brand deals, wrestling appearances. He was always there with a tailor-made suit and $1 million smile, always excited to promote his next big project, always ready with some inspiring words, always waiting to sell you something. But problems were afoot, dear viewer. The first signs of trouble came with rumours about his behaviour on the Fast and the Furious movies. By all accounts, he was a dominant presence on set, and not in a good way. He wasted no time reshaping the movies to benefit himself, pushing for more lines and more screen time for his own character. He apparently had a clause in his contract that says he couldn't lose a fight, and he even got into a public feud with Vin Diesel and accused him of being lazy, entitled, and a complete pussy to work with. Naturally, this didn't gel too well with his smiling, easygoing public persona, and when he started taking heat for this post, he soon deleted it. Keep that one in mind too, because the theme of Dwayne retreating from a position the moment he senses it could harm his image would become a bit of a theme in the years ahead. The idea of him being an asshole on set would really come up during the filming of Red 1, where apparently he'd routinely show up late for filming with no explanation or apology. And I don't just mean 30 or 40 minutes late, I mean 7 or 8 hours. Jesus, that's basically an entire working day for normal people. These constant delays pushed back the schedule by weeks and added about $50 million to the film's budget. The weirdest thing about all this though was the piss story. Rather than just going to the bathroom to take a leak like a normal person, Dwayne insisted on pissing into plastic bottles right there on set and handing them off to the crew to deal with. Like, imagine that for a second. Imagine it's your first time on a film set, you're all excited about being part of the magic of movie making, and instead you find yourself hauling a leaky bottle filled with some asshole's urine. But that was only the beginning of Dwayne's problems. People were beginning to notice things about all those big budget action movies he'd been churning out over the years. He was basically playing the same fucking character in everything he did. Same personality, same general character arc, even the same clothes half the time. His movies were starting to be seen as the McDonald's Happy Meals of the film world, experienced by millions of people worldwide but completely homogenous and forgettable. What had started out as charming and marketable was quickly becoming tiresome and predictable. The other thing people were realising about Dwayne was that he lies. A lot. Often about the weirdest fucking things, like how many calories he eats per day, or claiming that he was visiting In-N-Out Burger for the first time. 3 different times. Like, why would you even make something like that up in the first place? Who even gives a shit if you go to a burger restaurant? On the subject of stuff that Dwayne was putting into his body though, people were also starting to get a bit suspicious about his physique. Despite the fact that he was hurtling towards 50, he seemed to be getting bigger and more muscular with each passing year, and well, people were not buying it anymore. Allegations of steroid abuse were running wild, and the more he tried to play it down, the more they seemed to ramp up. Now, remember what I told you about Dwayne tailoring his persona to match the situation? That kind of thing definitely worked in the early days of his career when nobody was around to fact check him, but in the days of the internet and social media, well, people were beginning to realise that instead of having his own opinions about stuff, he basically just said whatever he thought people wanted to hear. And if he got any kind of pushback, he'd immediately fold like a house of cards and backtrack. The worst example was probably his Joe Rogan interview in 2023, where he basically spent 3 hours giving evasive answers and reflecting the questions back at him. It was like Dwayne was the one doing the fucking interviewing, and it all fed into the public perception that nothing about the guy was real. He was more like a brand than a person. His every public appearance and sentiment carefully stage managed for maximum financial impact. All was not well on the wrestling side of things either. See, ever since his jump to Hollywood, Dwayne had kept one foot in the wrestling business as a kind of part-time superstar. Anytime one of his movies flopped or he needed a bit of a career boost, he'd retreat back to the WWE for another run, make a ton of money, and then leave again. That strategy had been working pretty well until he showed up in 2024 and shoved his way into the middle of a long-running feud between Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns. The fan backlash was so extreme that the WWE actually had to rewrite the whole storyline and put Cody back in center stage where he belongs. In typical fashion, Dwayne would later claim that the whole thing was part of a grand plan to make Cody even more popular.
I think I can smell shite.
Fuck off, Dwayne. Everyone could see him for exactly what he was now, an aging superstar trying to hold on to the spotlight beyond his time, even if it meant screwing over younger and more deserving people. The biggest disaster though was 2022's Black Adam, which was supposed to be Dwayne's big entry into the superhero genre. He'd made no secret of the fact that he was taking control of the DCEU and reshaping it with himself at the centre, that he was going to do for DC what he'd done for the Fast and the Furious franchise and rehabilitate it.
Yes, I can definitely smell shite.
Well, that didn't work. The movie flopped big time and Black Adam was quickly buried along with the rest of the DCEU. The Rock's big push into the superhero genre was over before it even began. But that didn't stop Dwayne from desperately trying to cope about it, claiming that the movie was actually a success if you looked at it the right way.
Really?
Yeah, sure buddy, losing hundreds of millions of dollars and nuking an entire franchise is a pretty loose definition of success. And so we find ourselves in the year of our Lord 2025, where Dwayne Johnson has gone from the king of the Hollywood box office to a star in decline and a cautionary tale. He really is a perfect example of having too much of a good thing, that trying to please everyone ultimately ends up satisfying no one, and at the end of the day, all the fame and success in the world is no substitute for authenticity. I don't think he's a bad guy necessarily, and he's clearly done a lot of good things with his life and career. He just became so intoxicated by his larger-than-life persona and his desperate need to appeal to absolutely everyone that in the end it kind of consumed him. So what's next for The Rock? Is he going to bounce back, pivot and find a new path to success, or fade away into movie obscurity? Well, his upcoming film The Smashing Machine seems to signal a move away from generic big-budget action slop and maybe a willingness to take on more challenging roles that play against type, so who knows? The world does love a good redemption arc, and I don't think he's burned all of his bridges with audiences yet, but if there's one thing to take away from all this, perhaps it's time for him to stop being The Rock and finally start being Dwayne Johnson. If he can do that, perhaps there's still a way back for him. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.